Hello and welcome to Season 3 of Beyond Borders. This is the space where we explore the harder questions, the ones that don't always fit in a headline. Each week we go deeper into the future of creativity, systems, technology and trust. Not just to make sense of where we're going, but to ask, what are we building and who are we becoming as we build it?
Hi guys, it's good to be back for another season with Carolyn and Pim. And of course, you as well, our beautiful listeners. In today's episode, we will discuss an aspect of our lives we often overlook, but have been a part of since creation. One that can steer you towards your growth and development or steer you far away from it. It's a simple concept, one that often feels far from our grasp. But a close embrace can change how we view life and create the lives that we want for ourselves. So, Caroline and Pim, I'm thrilled to have you both here again. I'm eager to explore the power of choice and how we can use it to reshape our lives. Quickly, I'm just going to share a quick thought process as to this conversation and its inspiration is, everybody has a choice. And I believe at all times. It may not seem like it, but we often do. And I know certain situations may limit our choices, but oftentimes it's not usually the choice that's the challenge, but living with the consequences or impact of the choices that we struggle with. So it's a curious one for me, and it can easily become sensitive. So I'm eager to hear from both of you. Quickly, Carolyn, when you embrace the concept of choice, when you dissect it, what comes to mind as you explore it?
Thank you, Sprenko. Interesting topic and an interesting one for me personally too, I think. Um, I take a grounded view of choice, and what I mean by that is my core belief is that our freedoms are situated, and by that I mean our circumstances often shape the range of choices available to us. They define the edges of what's possible in any given moment. So for me, any conversation about choice naturally leads to a conversation about freedom. At a broader level, our choices are limited socially, economically, structurally. But when we zoom in on the granular level, what am I going to do today? What direction of travel am I going to take, etc.? Then we often do have a greater capacity for autonomy and self-direction. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And I'm hearing something which I would like us to poke on a little bit further. But quickly with Pim, I just want to know, uh, do you think we always have always had the power of choice, or do you think our choices are sort of shaped by the experiences and how we choose to live our lives?
Great question. I think you always have a choice, but many circumstances determine the choices that you have. Your financials, your work, your partner, whatever, all those things have effect on the choices you can make. So the choices that are dealt to you can differ from one to another and one even from week to week. Of course, you always have to say, I can say no, and no is a no. So it's also recommended definitely when you are very busy or if somebody wants something from you really don't want to do, I really advise just say no and make it clear the no is non-negotiable. So in that way, you always have a choice because you have the choice to decline and say no. But again, those choices, saying no can also be come because the other choices that are dealt to you at that given moment because of other circumstances are not in favor of you or not, or you just don't want to do them. So you always have a freedom of choice. I think Caroline said very well that there is a free will and freedom, but that freedom is mostly a little bit closed down to a no. Of course, you can always say yes, but a yes is most of the time also the easy answer. And so I think you have the freedom to say no.
Thank you very much, Pim. And I love what both of you have shared. And there's something that's striking out for me that I would like to touch on a little bit. It's that free will, that freedom to choose. And you mentioned something, Carolyn, without zooming in, right? It appears that we have the freedom to choose. You can decide to say yes or no, or I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be a part of this. But in your experience, do you do you lean to the belief that at every point in time, regardless of the situation, regardless of the experience, regardless of your authority and status in that situation, do you lean to the belief that we all have a choice at all times, or in certain situations, we have no option to choose and just to go with whatever is being presented to us?
It's super complicated, this discussion, Sprenko, because I think, of course, there are situations in life, and I'm sure you both have been in them, like me, where you feel you have no choice. You can kind of step back and philosophically say, of course you have a choice. You have a choice. You do. You can say yes and you can say no, and it is simplistic in that sense. But the complexities sometimes of life mean that we feel we have no choice. And I think maybe sometimes it's in conversation when the questions are bigger than us, bigger than our personal decisions, our personal choices, our personal freedoms. Maybe it's at times when we're considering the impact of our choices on other people, maybe people close to us, maybe people around us, and depending what role we have in life, maybe even the people, that we don't know, but we have some duty of care towards. So it is super, super difficult, and it depends what we're thinking of in terms of ourselves. Is this best for me, or is it best for somebody else, or in the wider sense, perhaps for humanity or our community, or whatever? It doesn't really answer your question, and I apologize, but I'm trying to unpick this topic.
Mm. Yeah, I understand that, and I agree with you. It's a complex one to look into. And that's why I asked the question, because a lot of times we have people in certain situations, right? You're being abused, you're being manipulated, you're taken advantage of. And in a lot of those situations, in a lot of those experiences, if you're not wearing the shoe, if you don't know how it fits, you can often come out and say, well, you had a choice. You could have been there, you could have, you could have stayed away, you could have said no, you could have rejected it, you could have walked away. And it all looks so easy, even though I agree with that school of thought that we all have choices, even when we do not know that the option is there. So that's one question that I want to ask, to you, Pim, now. Do you believe that even in the absence of awareness, even in the absence of self-awareness, even without knowing that you have a choice, does that take away the option of choice and free will?
Yeah, a difficult one. I think it's always when it comes to choices, it's easier to see them afterwards, like when you're recapping what happened, than in
Mm,
front. Sometimes you come home after a meeting and you realize, oh wait, there was another option as a choice, but we didn't talk about it, or
mm,
most time another solution. So that can make it very difficult to realize what all the choices are and easier to see them afterwards. During the meetings or during the moment itself, yeah, the only thing that's always certain is that you can say no,
mm,
because you can just decline for all reasons. Saying yes, also from a business point, can be more difficult, but because you have to find a way for your business or yourself to actually make it work, and if it can work, and is it beneficial for you, what does it do about the brand, and all that, all those kinds of stuff. And sometimes, as I said, the real choice or the best solution can be found after a day or two, after you recap what happened and rethinking all the things that you have talked about with that person. And then your choices might become less limited, and you say, okay, there are multiple solutions we need to talk about. Then I highly advise you just make a call and see, well, we discussed this. Is it set in stone yet? Yes or no? If there's a no, we can still make changes. Just say, come in a quick call. I have this idea in regards to the choices that we made, and then you can always see if the choices that have been made stay or that they change a little bit. But when it comes to manipulation and all that kind of stuff within business, you have to understand that the business you're probably talking to is trying to sell you something. Uh,
Hmm.
and you always hope that all the facts are facts and that all the data is the correct data and that you're not getting manipulated in something that won't work, whatever happens. But then again, if you have your doubts, you have a very powerful word which is called no or I decline, which can always be used. And that is completely freedom, in my opinion, because you always have that option. The other person can't force that option upon you. They can't force a yes. Yeah, okay, we're gonna sit on this table, we're gonna get a yes, and that's the only option that you have. No, you can always say no. Of course, there are some circumstances you have to say yes, but then in general, your business
Yes.
is in a lot of trouble. Um, but for your personal, you always have a no, and I think that's a good thing. And people should respect that and really understand that the no is a no, definitely, and it's a big no. So freedom is
Yes.
always there.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. And, we also have to consider the fact that life isn't always black and white. There are gray areas and all that. And you said something that stands out for me is sometimes we do not see the options. We do not see the choice. We do not see the presence of freedom to choose in the moment, right? For several reasons. Sometimes it's years after. I work with a lot of people, in mental health, and oftentimes in situations, especially when it relates to abuse, childhood trauma, and the likes, the absence of choice is pronounced. As a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, oftentimes in certain demographics, is almost an abomination to even mention or suggest that you have a choice in the place of childhood trauma and abuse. And it's something I've been reflecting on for a while now. There's a question I want to ask Caroline, but before I do that is, there's this movie, The Matrix, right? Neo was talking to this lady and she was trying to tell him that he already chose his decision. And he asked her, if you already know what I'm going to do I really have a choice? And she hits him with the line, you've already made the choice. You're just here to understand why. And that statement hits me in a way where I reflect often and I'm like, maybe a lot of times we know that we have the option to choose. We know that we have the freedom to choose. But the struggle often lies in, can we live with that choice that we're going to make? You know, and that makes me think about it. And when I think about it like that, I kind of realize or think to myself and say this, free will exists, but it may not exist in the moment that we want it to. It exists in who we are leading to that moment, the person we've become. And this was prompts me to ask the question that I've been wanting to ask you, Caroline, for a while. In your experience as an individual, personal life, mentorship, artist, community leader, have you been in any situation that left you with, so to put it, without a choice? And how did you navigate that to come out putting your best interest at heart?
Hmm. That's a challenging question for me,
I know.
Sprenko.
I
And
apologize.
um, yes, and it's funny because before I answer, I'm going to say, as I was listening to you both speaking, I was wondering about gender in this.
Mm,
I'm the female in the room here, and I don't know to what extent at the minute that changes how I feel about
mm,
choice compared to you. And I don't think we're going to get an answer on that today, but it's something I just wanted to throw out there at the minute. So, in answer to your questions, yes, there have been moments in my life where I felt like I had no choice at all. But when I unpick those situations, I realize that they often involved caring for or considering others. And I've also experienced in lifetimes where decisions felt like they were being forced on me, not physically, but emotionally or relationally, where the expectations or pressures around me gave me no real room to move.
mm,
So, yes, there are circumstances where choice is taken or deeply restricted, I think, and you were talking about abuse and young people and the choices being limited. Of course they are. By design they are. By time they are, you
Mm,
know. But I think for me personally, over time as an adult, I've learned to hold the complexity of choice of all of that. And what I mean is that I've become more philosophical about what's within my control and what isn't. So sometimes I've had to accept the choice I could make, even if it was uncomfortable, and just move forward. And I've learned that that's not giving up, that's just choosing peace in the middle of complexity. So we as sometimes, or at least I have found myself sometimes in positions where it has been incredibly difficult, and I don't, the thing that the path that I was on, if I'd have chosen what was best for me, as I'm saying that, I realized that what was best for me was taken out of my control. And that was kind
mm.
of in a work situation, not in a personal life. So, what the cards being dealt were being dealt in such a way that I had limited choices. And so for me, the way I process that and the way I am able to cope with that is realize and accept that I've made an uncomfortable choice in complicated situations. That doesn't mean I'm giving up. It just means that I'm choosing peace in the middle of this complexity. I hope that is clear.
Yes, it's very clear, and thank you for sharing. You lead us beautifully into taking this conversation a little bit further as regards how, even as adults, not just as young ones, right? Not just in situations of childhood trauma and abuse, but even in work environments, a lot of people live and work in toxic work environments simply because, quote unquote, there's no other choice. If they leave that job, how are they going to survive? If they do not do what is being offered to them or presented to them, how do they move, further in their career path or whatever it is? A lot of people, let's not go in there. A lot of people do not even have a roof over their head if they don't make certain choices. So I hear you loud and clear, and I appreciate that share. And something sticks out for me, and is that being at peace with the decisions that you make in the moment. Sometimes it could be future peace, making choices that are difficult in the moment, but preserve your peace in the future. That's what you're trying to share, right? Just want to be sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That is that because I think as I was listening to you summarizing, I was thinking about what Pim said, which is absolutely true. Sometimes you're in situations where you feel forced, and it
Mm,
isn't as simple as a yes or a no. It is more complicated than that. And sometimes what I've done in those kind of situations is like called a halt, I have to stop
mm,
here because I can't make a decision in the way that this is being rolled out. And sometimes, and Pim touched on it, we're in situations where people potentially are trying to manipulate us into situations, and that can become frantic. And they will try and impose some sense of urgency, some time limited thing. We have to make this decision. Well, no, you don't. What I've learned as I got older is that their time restraints are their time restraints. They're not mine. And so sometimes we have to take a deep breath and say, stop, I need to think. I can't make a decision on this at the minute. You're not allowing me space to think. I need time. And I will step back and I will step away. And it isn't brilliant because they don't like it. But I think what it illustrates to me is the minute you do that in a business scenario or in a scenario where you are buying something, the attitude of the people changes. And if anything illustrates to anyone that they are trying to be manipulated, it should be that.
that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I want to ask Pim a question. Based off of what you both shared and what you just led us into now, how do you navigate situations where You clearly know you're being manipulated, but you're presented with limited choices. You know you have the free will to make a choice. You can put your best interest at heart or people please. How do you navigate such in your experience as an artist, founder, business entrepreneur?
Well, when you know being manipulated and the choices that are there are the only choices that you have, well, well, you need to find the best one, to be honest. And
Mm-hmm.
even then, there is still a no. But let's say there is a circumstance where there is a no, there is no available, which is very rare, let's be honest. But then you have to find the best one that works for you with the most limited risk. Because you know you're being manipulated. So you know there are some facts that are not true. So you also know that the process you're going into isn't the process they t talked about to try to sell you. You always keep in mind that people you are with the phone or having the meeting with, there's a big chance there are commissions involved, certain KPIs or whatever. So they have a
Mm,
goal. Unfortunately, when you're being manipulated, it's not a fair goal.
yeah.
And I think you can always contact maybe a superior or somebody other in the business to check and to see what then comes out of it, or ask for some more time and to research more and find different contacts within that business to see what is the real information, what are the real risks, and can I develop a better plan with them, or can I develop a no? That's also always an option, as I said earlier. Um, it's really more, I think delaying the process can be very beneficial at that time. Unfortunately, many times you work with deadlines. For
Mm-hmm.
example, take an event, you need to have a deadline everything needs to be finished before you can go to the event. There are certain days for it, for finance and etc.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's very difficult to stall the process. And then you have to think, okay, what are the things where I'm quite sure there's no or less risk involved? What are the things I can arrange via my own business myself so I control the process? And what are the things they control? Because it will be a forced yes in that case, and you will be forced to work with them.
It's interesting, and I love that we're having this conversation. It's a beautiful one because it's a complex one, but one that is very relatable to everybody. At every point in time, you have to make a choice. And one thing I keep reminding myself and close folks around me is at all times, you have a choice. The struggle is being able to live with the decision to make the choice. But we may not always see it. I didn't always know this. And Karen, you said something as well. As you became an adult, you lived new experiences, you grew older, you learned from mistakes and all that, right? So that's why I strongly believe in the identity of who you become. Because sometimes you could be in certain situations and feel like, oh, you know what? I just better do what is being presented to me because I have no other choice. I have no other option. But when you choose the man or the woman who would meet the moment where your freedom lies, it gets better for you because then you know better what manipulation looks like. You know better what abuse looks like from a mile away. It's not happening yet, but you can observe, you can see, you can identify, triggers, signals, and you can make more informed choices, more informed decisions. And that's where I sit at the moment because I believe there's so much power in making choices that has our full on faces on them. So as we slowly wind down because we're short on time, I have a question to both of you. If there's one thing that you can leave our listeners with today as regards the power of choice and how we can use it to shape our lives, what would that be, Carly?
I think choice is often quieter than we expect it to be. It's not always bold or obvious. Sometimes it's just choosing not to react, choosing not to chase, choosing to rest, or choosing to carry on even when no one sees what you're doing. So for me, living a fulfilling life isn't about having every option available. It's about becoming deeply conscious of the options that I do have and making the choices that I do have with care. And when things don't feel like a choice at all, that's when I choose how I respond, even when I can't choose what's happening, because I think for me, at this point in my life, presence is a choice. And I always try to choose that.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Especially when we cannot control the outcome, the choices that we make can speak boldly of who we are or who we are becoming. Thank you so much, Caroline. Pim, any thoughts?
Well, the biggest thing is no is always an answer, and that no should be respected in all scenarios. And it's okay to have a little bit of a stall moment and see if there are multiple more choices available than the choices that are given to you after recapping the meeting or whatever. And it's also very good to call back. Well, I thought about the choices that we have made, and I think I have a better idea, or I think some changes need to be made to make it work. I think that's also quite normal to do. Sometimes you're very pushed into meetings and you have to make choices directly. That is fine. It happens a lot, but also the choices can be very flexible when it comes to a business point. Okay, this because choices can also come with problems, and those problems can evolve and they can also be solved. So the moment you have a thought process about the choice, it's okay to give a call and say, well, I might have a different idea. We can do it like this, and this. And then eventually it will still work for the both of us. Are you agree on that? Yes or no? So yeah, there's always a no and there's always solutions.
Thank you very much, Pim. I would like to just share something briefly as we wrap up this episode. The power of choice is outstanding. We can all choose how we view the world and the experiences we encounter in our respective journeys. However, living with the outcome of our choices is a personal decision every single person must make peace with if you are going to live a fulfilling life. And I hope that as you listen to this episode, something sparks in you to remind you that even in situations where you are left without a choice, quote unquote, you still have a choice you can make, even when you choose not to make any choice. There you have it, guys. If you've enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments and on social media. We're always happy to read from you. And until next time, keep choosing peace at all times.